The Candyman. It was Halloween night, 1974. The neighborhood in Pasadena, Texas, was full of costumed children. For 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien, it was the best night of the year. He finished his rounds, his pillowcase heavy with candy, and went home. His father, Ronald Clark O'Brien, a respectable optician and church deacon, had already planned the horror. He had taken out hefty life insurance policies on his own children. All he needed was to collect. That night, as Timothy and his sister sorted their candy, O'Brien produced a handful of giant pixie sticks. He told the children a generous neighbor had given them out. He handed one to his son and others to a few neighboring children. Timothy, trusting his father completely, opened the giant straw. He poured the white powder into his mouth. It was intensely bitter, not like candy at all. He complained, but O'Brien insisted he drink water to wash it down. The boy did as he was told, not knowing he had eaten a lethal dose of potassium cyanide. The chemical attack was pretty quick. You see, cyanide suffocates the body at a cellular level. As Timothy lay in his bed, his cells began to scream for oxygen they could no longer use. His body, in its final painful moments, would have begun to shake violently. His vision then went dark. His heart pounded wildly, then suddenly stopped. He was dead before he reached the hospital. O'Brien played the grieving father perfectly, but the police saw through the act. The giant pixie sticks were pretty odd. The cyanide, traced to O'Brien's workplace, was found in a dusty container, its seal recently broken. He had crushed the crystals and filled the straws himself, sewing the ends shut. He had murdered his own son for money. Ronald Clark O'Brien was convicted and, years later, executed by lethal injection. Zachy Woods. It was a quiet Halloween night in 2021 in Shreveport, Louisiana. The air was cold, and the streets were filled with the sounds of children laughing and running between houses. On one porch, 19-year-old Zachy R. Woods was enjoying the evening, happily handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. He was sitting on the steps of his home, just having fun and enjoying the night. Then, without warning, the peace of the night was disturbed by the roar of a car engine. A vehicle sped down the street. From its window, a gun was aimed directly at the porch. Then, suddenly, a burst of gunfire shattered the quiet night. Zachy, caught completely by surprise, had no time to react. He was struck multiple times by the bullets. The force of the impact threw him backward, his body collapsing on the porch. By the time he fell to the ground, police say he was already dead. He had 15 gunshot wounds to the head, torso, and body, with some bullets piercing his lungs, meaning that for the last few seconds of his life, Zachy was literally drowning in his own blood. The car sped away into the night, leaving behind a scene. The candy he was holding scattered across the ground, mixing with the blood now staining the concrete. Neighbors who moments before had been chatting, screamed, and called 911. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but the wounds were too severe. Zachy Woods was pronounced dead even before he got into the ambulance. The craziest part was that there seemed to be no motive. Zachy was just a normal young guy with no ties to gangs, and he didn't owe anyone money either. He just seemed to be the wrong guy at the wrong place. The Duval Axe murders. Disclaimer. There were no witnesses to what happened next, so what I'm about to tell you is only what the police could guess had happened. It was Halloween night, 1911, in Colorado Springs. The Duval family, father, mother, and their 2 young children, had settled in for the night. The house was dark and quiet. The attacker moved silently through the house, with a farmer's axe gripped tight. Frank Duval and his wife were most likely asleep, and that's why they were so defenseless against him, as the first blows fell on them in their beds. The axe blade would have landed with a wet crack, splitting bone and driving fragments deep into brain matter. The initial strike was likely followed by a second, and then a third. A brutal overkill that didn't just stop at murder. In a final act, the killer cut their skulls open, removing their brains and leaving them on the floor. But the killer wasn't finished. The couple's 2 children were next. The axe then fell on them with the same force. The small bodies were no match for the axe, shattering their bones and tearing through flesh. This would ensure no one in the Duval house would be left as a witness. Suspicion immediately focused on a boarder, Frank Edwards. The evidence against him was pretty damning. He had fled the state, was captured with blood on his clothes, and had tried to pawn Frank Duval's watch. Yet, in a classic failure of justice, the case was deemed too circumstantial. The jury acquitted him, and Frank Edwards walked free, leaving the butcher of an entire family officially unpunished. The Halloween ride. Tom and Jill Estes, a couple from Massachusetts, were on a motorcycle trip, riding through the town to mark their wedding anniversary. On October 31st, 2019, their journey brought them to Camden, Tennessee. The night was dark, the rural roads empty. They were just looking for a place to camp, unaware that, out there in the dark, someone was hunting them. Their predator was a truck driver named Christopher Hampton. He was on the same road, piloting a massive semi-truck. For reasons known only to him, he targeted the couple on the motorcycle. He began tailgating them with his high beams on, flooding their mirrors with light. With a final, aggressive surge, Hampton used his truck to force their motorcycle off the road. The Harley skidded violently into the dirt, throwing Tom and Jill from the vehicle. They landed on the roadside. Hampton brought his rig to a halt, climbed out, and closed in on his soon-to-be victims. He then forced the dazed couple at gunpoint into the dense tree line, dragging them away from any potential help and into isolation. There, in the shadows of the woods, he raised his firearm and executed Tom Estes with a single, point-blank gunshot. He then turned the weapon on Jill, firing again and ending her life. They were left there, side by side in the leaves, a married couple murdered on their anniversary. Their bodies were discovered the next day. The killer was eventually caught, linked to the scene by cell phone data and ballistics, but a motive was never clear: the Halloween kidnapping. It was Halloween night, 1971, in Indianapolis. 9-year-old Lisa Ann French was among the hundreds of kids trick-or-treating. As the evening wound down, a man in a car pulled up to the curb. He lured Lisa toward his car with the simple, evil promise of more candy. Trusting the stranger, the young girl stepped closer. In a flash, he grabbed her, forced her inside the vehicle, and sped away into the night. Lisa was then taken to a secluded area where the man sexually assaulted her, but even that wasn't enough for him. He then proceeded to strangle her, his hands closing around her throat, eventually taking her life. For over 40 years, the case grew cold. The killer had vanished, leaving behind only a trail of grief and unanswered questions. Then, in 2012, a breakthrough came from old evidence. Advanced DNA analysis finally identified the perpetrator, a man named James E. Williams. But true justice was stolen. Williams had already faced consequences for another crime, having died in a prison cell back in 1983, forever escaping punishment for the murder of Lisa Ann French. Poison ivy. A loud Halloween party was happening in a Michigan field in 2014. In the middle of the crowd was Chelsea Bruck, a 21-year-old woman dressed as Poison Ivy. She wore a bright green outfit and a red wig. It was supposed to be just a normal, noisy party night. But before the night was over, Chelsea would vanish. As the night wore on, the massive party churned, and Chelsea was separated from her friends. Swallowed by the crowd, she was just another costumed figure. It was in this crowd that she met a stranger. He seemed normal at first, but little did she know that he would become her worst nightmare. What began as a friendly encounter quickly turned aggressive. When Chelsea resisted his advances and tried to break away, the man's anger erupted. To overpower her, he delivered a single punch to her face. The blow was fatal. The force snapped her head back, knocking her unconscious instantly. The trauma to her neck and brainstem was so severe, it shut down her body's ability to breathe, causing her to suffocate. She never woke up. Realizing she was dead or dying, the man did not call for help. Instead, he disposed of her. He carried her lifeless body from the party and dumped it in a remote wooded area, hiding her among the leaves and debris. For 6 months, Chelsea was just a missing person. Her disappearance triggered a massive, desperate search that yielded nothing. The breakthrough came in April 2015, when a grim discovery was made in a wooded area: her skeleton. The only tangible clue left was a single, weathered piece of her Poison Ivy costume. That single weathered piece of her Poison Ivy costume was more than just fabric. It was a direct link to her killer. Investigators identified it as part of a specific, mass-produced costume. They then took a strategic gamble. They released a clear image of the costume's unique plastic clasp to the public, asking if anyone recognized it. This move paid off. Someone who knew Daniel Clay came forward, confirming to police that he had purchased that same piece. This gave investigators their first major suspect. With Clay identified, everything else fell into place. They re-interviewed witnesses, some of whom had now changed their stories, or placed Clay with Chelsea at the party. Most damningly, they pulled his cell phone records, which placed his phone at the location of the massive outdoor party that night, and then later, in the remote area where her body was dumped months later. Faced with this web of evidence, the costume purchase, the witness statements, and the digital footprint from his phone that connected him to both the crime and the dump site, Clay had no way out. Confronted with the proof, he confessed: the baseball bat murder. The argument started over something small, the kind of stupid dispute that happens between roommates. But for 21-year-old Andrew Layton and his friend, 20-year-old Brendan Mess, the anger didn't fade. It grew. They lived in a small apartment in Waltham, Massachusetts, and on the night of October 31st, 2011, it would all come crashing down. They got into another fight, and as the fight exploded, Andrew stormed away from the confrontation and returned moments later, holding a wooden baseball bat. Layton swung the bat with full force, and as the solid wood connected with the side of Mess's head, it cracked open his skull. Mess likely collapsed instantly, but Layton didn't stop. He stood over his fallen friend and brought the bat down again and again, pulverizing his skull. He hit him so much that blood and brain matter sprayed across the floor and walls. But the bat to the face wasn't enough. He went to the kitchen and retrieved a large, curved knife and then turned his attention back to Brendan Mess's body. He used the knife to nearly decapitate his former friend. He then stabbed him multiple times in the chest for good measure. The craziest part is that Layton then simply left the apartment, leaving his dead friend behind. He was arrested days later, his clothes still stained with his victim's blood. In 2013, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, making sure he would die in prison. Thanks for watching.